The seatbelt sign isn't even on when she freezes in the aisle, one polished shoe half a step forward, fingers still curled around the headrest of 2B. Samantha Hayes was only gone 2 minutes. A quiet trip to the restroom. A breath. A reset. But now her handbag sits beneath 2A like a witness that can't speak, and a stranger is in her seat, leaning back as if the sky always belonged to him. He doesn't flinch when she returns. He doesn't even look rushed. A tall, middle-aged man with the unbothered calm of someone who has never had to explain himself to anyone. Water glass on the armrest, condensation shining under the cabin lights. He has the posture of a person who believes the world should accommodate him. "Excuse me," Samantha says, voice steady, polite. "That's my seat." The man turns slowly, measuring her. His eyes say he has seen the world in seasons she's only read about. His tone says he's the authority here. "Young lady," he replies, "I'm older than you. Out of respect, you should let me sit here." The cabin inhales. Conversations shrink into whispers. A flight attendant's smile stiffens. Phone cameras tilt like periscopes peeking out of still water. The man doesn't move. He doesn't ask for her ticket. He doesn't offer his. He just sits deeper, legs out, authority draped over him like a coat. Samantha blinks. For a heartbeat she is 8 years old again, being told by a headmistress that her perfect essay must have been copied because no child writes like that. She swallows and lifts the boarding pass she'd tucked into her blazer pocket. "Seat 2A, she says, gently. "I paid for it." He folds his arms. "In my culture," he says, "younger people give up their place for elders. You should sit somewhere else." In the hush of first class, the words feel heavier than they are. Culture, respect, place. They land like stones dropped into clear water, ripples bumping against the quiet rules people follow to keep peace in public. Samantha exhales, her eyes like glass, reflective, unbreakable. "This isn't about culture," she says, and the room hears more than her voice. It hears the practiced calm of a person who has spent a lifetime learning not to panic when someone tries to move the goalposts. "It's about what's right. That is my seat." He smirks. "Money doesn't buy respect. Learn to honor your elders." There it is. The word that follows her like static. Money. Not her name. Not her work. Not the idea that even Billionaire girl is a human being obligated to rules like everyone else. Just money. As if the cost of the seat cancels the value of her dignity. Samantha feels the soft carpet under her heels. Feels the plane's air, a little too cold, curl around her forearms. Feels the press of something old and familiar against her ribs. A choice. Yield and disappear, or stand and be called difficult. Yield and reinforce the story that power is allowed to rearrange the world for itself. Or don't. "Sir," she says, "please. I'm asking you to move." He doesn't. He takes another sip of water. He looks at her the way a gate looks at a path. "You can arrive here, but you cannot pass." "I saw the seat open," he says, "and I sat down. You left. I'm here now." The attendant arrives. Soft apologies stitched into every syllable. "Good morning," she whispers, the way people do when they want to be neutral and helpful at the same time. "Can I take a look at your boarding passes, please?" Samantha hands hers over immediately. The attendant nods, scanning, and looks to the man. He waves her off. "My ticket is somewhere. Doesn't matter. This is about morality." The attendant's smile falters. Passengers lean. Eyes collect in clusters. In 3C, a woman taps record. In 4A, a young man whispers, "This is going viral," like he's naming a storm rolling in from the coast. The aircraft hums its patient hum, a giant waiting animal still leashed to the ground. Samantha feels a slow burn climb up her throat, part anger, part humiliation, part disbelief at the audacity housed inside this stranger's skin. She has not flown commercial in years. She wanted a morning with ordinary people, ordinary rules. You get the seat you pay for. You keep the place you've earned. You follow the printed ticket even when no one is watching, because that's how strangers live together. He looks at her as if the universe came with footnotes only he was given. "Young lady," he repeats, "show your elders some respect." Respect. The word tastes different in her mouth than in his. In her world, respect is earned by honesty, steadiness, the courage to be fair when it hurts. In his world, at least in this moment, respect looks like surrender. A hand-me-down deference that erases her place because it makes his more comfortable. The attendant tries again, voice thinner now. "Sir, if you could just show me." He leans back, closes his eyes. "No." One syllable. A slammed door. Samantha's kindness tightens into a fist around her patience. Her jaw sets. A camera in 1D catches the shift in her expression. The quiet becomes steel. She reaches down to the small quilted handbag tucked beneath 2A, the bag she left as proof that she was not done with this place. She pulls it out with care, like she is retrieving evidence, like each second could be used against her later. If she raises her voice, she becomes the headline she has spent her adult life refusing to be: spoiled, entitled, another rich kid tantrum. If she steps aside, she becomes the story whispered about young women everywhere. They don't make trouble, they survive it. She takes a breath that tastes like recycled air and resolve. I am asking you one last time, she says, calm as ice. Please, move. Silence. The plane, the people, the pixels gathering light in 100 phones, all wait for the ending. The man opens his eyes. His voice is a blade wrapped in silk. No. Samantha nods once. Not at him, but at something inside her that has stopped asking permission. She turns to the attendant. Then please call security, she says. I won't be bullied out of my seat. The word bullied hangs there, heavy and honest. The attendant looks at the call button. Her hand hovers. She knows that pressing it will pop the bubble of fragile peace and scatter more eyes, more phones, more opinions into the air. She looks at the man. He looks at the window. He has the serene certainty of someone who believes the rules are a suggestion for other people. A child 2 rows back asks their mother, too loudly, why won't he let her sit? The mother shushes. The tension has a sound now, like wires stretched tight, ready to sing or snap. Samantha stands tall. She does not tremble. She does not cry. She does not apologize for existing. In the quiet, you can hear the pressure of truth pushing at the cabin walls. Then, the captain's chime cuts through the standoff, a bell tolling for whatever comes next. The intercom clicks alive, a throat clearing above the clouds they haven't reached yet. Ladies and gentlemen, every head turns. The attendant's finger stops above the call button. The man in 2A sits a fraction straighter. Samantha's eyes flick up to the ceiling speaker, pupils wide. We regret to inform you. If you're feeling that knot in your chest right now, you're not alone. I worked so hard crafting this story for you, so if you're enjoying it so far, please subscribe. It truly helps me keep bringing you more stories like this. What would you have done in Samantha's place at that exact moment? Press the call button, move to another seat, or confront him again? Tell me in the comments. The captain's voice had sliced through the cabin like a blade through silk, leaving everyone waiting for the sentence that would decide how this standoff ended. But to understand why this moment mattered so deeply, we need to step back and see who these two people really were, and what they carried into this clash. Samantha Hayes, the billionaire girl who refused to be defined. To the public, she was a label, the billionaire girl. To tabloids, she was gossip, fortune, fashion, fairy tales. But to herself, she was someone constantly fighting to be seen beyond the numbers attached to her last name. Born into Gregory and Elaine Hayes' empire, Samantha's childhood looked perfect from the outside: mansions, private schools, luxury vacations. But privilege has its own chains. From the start, she was treated like a symbol, not a person. Classmates wanted access, not friendship. Teachers assumed her success came from tutors, not talent. Strangers dismissed her efforts with one sentence: of course she can do that, she's rich. So she learned to fight back, not with tantrums, but with perseverance. She earned her grades. She funded scholarships. She used her platform for causes that couldn't pay her back. She wanted people to see her not as an heiress, but as someone who valued fairness above all. And this was why she sometimes sought normalcy in the simplest of choices: walking without bodyguards, buying her own groceries, and today sitting on a commercial flight like everybody else. C2A wasn't just a seat. To Samantha, it was a quiet rebellion, a way of saying, I don't need privilege, I just need the dignity of fairness. David Cole, a man of pride and principle. The man now seated in 2A was David Cole, mid-40s, black in complexion, broad-shouldered, with an aura of certainty that made people listen when he spoke. In his community, he was respected as a voice of tradition, a man who believed deeply in hierarchy and honor. But pride can be a double-edged sword. David grew up in a culture where younger people were expected to defer to their elders. He had carried that belief into every space of his life: at work, at home, in public. Respect, in his eyes, wasn't earned, it was owed. So when he boarded the plane, saw an unoccupied seat in first class, and discovered it belonged to a much younger woman, he didn't see rules. He saw opportunity. A chance to remind the younger generation that age mattered more than money, tickets, or titles. But what he called teaching respect was, in truth, entitlement. And when entitlement meets a woman like Samantha Hayes, who had built her life on refusing to bow to unfairness, Conflict was inevitable. This confrontation wasn't about leather seats or legroom. It was about justice, dignity, and the invisible lines people draw around power. For Samantha, justice meant fairness, everyone honoring the same rules. For David, justice meant hierarchy, elders commanding space simply because of age. Two philosophies clashed at 30,000 feet before the plane even left the ground. And while passengers may have thought this was just an awkward disagreement, the truth is, both Samantha and David carried personal histories into this battle, histories that made them unwilling to bend. But here's the cruel irony neither of them knew: the fight they were having over C2A was destined to be meaningless. Because while Samantha stood, eyes locked with David's unyielding stare, and while whispers and phones captured every second of tension, the aircraft itself had already been ruled unfit to fly. Mechanical issues ticked silently in the background, unnoticed. The fight for 2A was real, but the journey it was supposed to lead to would never take place. Still, for Samantha, this wasn't a wasted fight. Her entire life had prepared her for this exact moment. At 16, she had defended her integrity when accused of cheating on an essay. At 21, she had claimed her place in a boardroom where men twice her age dismissed her. At 23, she had stood her ground against headlines that tried to reduce her to a caricature. And now, at 25, she wasn't just protecting a seat, she was protecting the principle that no one, no matter how old or respected, had the right to rewrite fairness for their own comfort. And so, with every camera watching, with every passenger whispering, she stood her ground, calm, firm, unyielding. And that was the moment the cabin chime cut through the air. The captain's voice crackled overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you." The cabin had frozen when the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you this flight has been cancelled due to technical issues. Please gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." For a moment, no one moved. It was as if time itself had taken a breath, suspending the standoff in a vacuum of silence. Then, like a dam cracking, groans filled the air. Passengers cursed under their breath, phones lit up with frantic rebooking apps, and the rustle of unbuckled seatbelts spread like wildfire. But for Samantha Hayes, the announcement landed differently. She stood there, her claim to 2A still contested, her dignity still under siege, when suddenly the fight ended, not because justice prevailed, not because the truth was acknowledged, but because circumstance had ripped the stage away from both of them. David Cole shifted uncomfortably, his authority dissolving in the shuffle of frustrated passengers. His fortress of entitlement cracked, not by confrontation, but by the weight of a captain's decree. He had fought for a seat on a flight that would never take off, and yet, in that absurd twist of fate, the conflict wasn't over, it was about to escalate. The plane emptied slowly, a mix of irritation and curiosity rippling through the crowd. People whispered, "Did you see that fight? She had the ticket, right? He just wouldn't move." Outside the gate, clusters of passengers waited for updates. It was there, under the sterile fluorescent lights of the terminal, that the truth surfaced like oil rising in water. David's actual boarding pass was checked again, and there it was in black and white. 18C, economy class. Passengers who had witnessed everything turned, their eyes narrowing, murmurs sharpened into audible disapproval. Wait, so he knew it wasn't his seat. He was in the wrong section entirely. That's ridiculous. David's face hardened. Pride tried to shield him, but it was too late. The mask had cracked. Samantha, however, didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat. She simply gathered her handbag and stood with the same poise she had carried onto the plane. In silence, she let the evidence speak. And that silence carried more power than any argument could. But the passengers weren't united in their judgment. Some sided with Samantha, applauding her composure. Others, surprisingly, leaned toward David, framing his actions as cultural misunderstanding rather than arrogance. Maybe he just wanted respect, one man muttered. But he lied about the seat. Another shot back. Yes, but elders deserve some privilege, came another voice. It wasn't just a seat dispute anymore. It had become a debate about morality, hierarchy, and the invisible rules people carry with them. And in that public debate, Samantha found herself under the same microscope she'd faced her entire life. Not judged for her actions, but for what people thought she represented. Some dismissed her defense of fairness as entitlement. Others praised it as strength. Justice was not universal. It was fractured, filtered through each person's worldview. Cornered, David tried to reclaim the narrative. He raised his voice, declaring to anyone who would listen, "Young people today have no respect for elders." She had the chance to show humility, but instead she embarrassed me in front of everyone." His words boomed through the gate area, sharp with indignation. Phones rose again, recording the new scene. Samantha remained silent, but her eyes were steady. She had learned long ago that sometimes the loudest person in the room is the weakest, grasping for control they've already lost. But David's outburst stunned her, not because of his words, but because she recognized the tactic. She had seen it countless times. When those with shaky ground beneath them lash out, they twist the narrative to paint themselves as the victim. And in that moment, Samantha realized this wasn't just a clash of two people. It was a mirror of something larger, the battle between fairness and entitlement, truth and manipulation, justice and power. Airline staff tried to restore order, urging passengers to rebook and move along. But the story had already spilled into the digital world. Videos of the confrontation circulated online within minutes, hashtags forming, strangers choosing sides without context. Some comments praised Samantha. She stood her ground with grace. "That's real class." Others attacked her. "Rich girl making drama over a chair, why didn't she just move?" The truth was visible in every recording, yet still distorted by interpretation. And this was the danger Samantha knew too well. In the court of public opinion, justice is not always decided by facts, it's decided by perception. As she sat near the gate, waiting for her rebooking, Samantha felt the familiar weight press against her ribs. She had wanted anonymity. She had wanted to blend in, to taste normalcy. But once again, she had become a story people would twist and dissect. She closed her eyes for a moment, replaying the confrontation. The smirk on David's face. The hesitation of the flight attendant. The cameras, always the cameras. And underneath it all, the simple truth. She had asked for fairness, and been met with arrogance. But there was something else, too. A lesson that whispered at the edges of her frustration. Justice isn't always delivered by force. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, like a cancelled flight exposing a lie for everyone to see. Meanwhile, David sat apart, seething. In his mind, he hadn't lost, he had been humiliated by circumstance. The cancellation had robbed him of the chance to prove his point. He replayed the moment in his head, rewriting it. If only the flight had taken off, if only the cameras hadn't been there, if only Samantha had just yielded. He told himself he was the victim. But deep down, something darker gnawed at him, the recognition that respect taken without merit crumbles under scrutiny. And though he would never admit it, a seed of doubt had been planted. By now, the gate was buzzing with debates, recordings, and speculation. What had begun as a seat dispute had grown into a symbol of entitlement versus dignity, tradition versus fairness, power versus justice. And Samantha realized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had ever been told to give up what was rightfully theirs because someone else claimed a higher ground of respect or authority. She hadn't chosen this fight, but it had chosen her. And how she carried herself through it would ripple beyond that terminal, beyond that day. As she gathered her things to head toward the rebooking counter, a journalist approached her, camera ready, microphone raised. "Miss Hayes," he said, "you're already trending online. People are calling this the seat scandal. Do you want to comment? Do you think you handled it fairly? Or are people right when they say you overreacted?" The microphone hovered inches from her face. Samantha looked at it, then at the journalist, then at the crowd of passengers who had all turned their heads, waiting for her answer. This was no longer just about a seat. It was about the narrative that would follow her into headlines, into homes, into history. Her next words would decide whether she walked away as a symbol of dignity, or as another caricature for tabloids to feast on. If you were Samantha, facing cameras and questions after everything that happened, would you speak up to defend yourself, or stay silent and let people interpret the story on their own? Comment your thoughts below. The journalist's microphone hovered like a sword waiting to fall. Samantha Hayes, standing in the center of the gate area with cameras flashing, had seconds to decide. Speak, and risk her words being twisted. Stay silent, and let others define her. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from recognition. She had been here before, in different forms, headlines, interviews, gossip columns, and each time, silence had been filled by the loudest voices. She lifted her chin. Her voice, calm but clear, cut through the noise. "I don't care about wealth. I don't care about titles. I care about fairness. And fairness means you don't take what isn't yours." The gate quieted. Cameras froze in that half-second of stunned stillness. Passengers glanced at one another, waiting for the fallout. But before the journalist could fire another question, another voice entered the scene, one that reframed the story completely. Ladies and gentlemen, an airline supervisor announced over the PA system, "We apologize for the inconvenience. All passengers must rebook. Please have your boarding passes ready for verification." Verification. It seemed routine, but it was the spark that turned whispers into wildfire. As staff checked tickets one by one, David Cole's truth was broadcast like a verdict in open court. His boarding pass read, 18C, Economy. Passengers gasped. Some scoffed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. "You weren't even in first class," one woman exclaimed. "You lied about your seat," another said. "That's stealing, man," a younger passenger muttered. David's face flushed with heat. He tried to hold on to his earlier argument. "It doesn't matter where my seat was. What matters is respect," he barked. But now the cameras weren't just recording Samantha, they were recording him. The man who had stolen a seat not assigned to him, then cloaked it in culture and morality. The twist was no longer private, it was public, undeniable, permanent. What should have ended there did not, because David refused to back down. "Yes, my ticket was for economy," he admitted, "but younger people must learn to give up their place. That is how you honor those who came before you." Some passengers groaned. Others debated. "He has a point about culture," one said. "But he lied," another countered. "He's twisting respect into entitlement," a third replied. The gate became a stage for a broader argument: respect versus fairness, tradition versus accountability, entitlement versus justice. And standing in the middle, Samantha realized she wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was standing for everyone who had ever been told to give up what was rightfully theirs under the guise of respect. By now, videos of the confrontation had exploded online. News sites picked it up within the hour. Hashtags spread across platforms. Clips of David refusing to move circulated beside screenshots of his economy ticket. Some viewers sided with Samantha. Finally, someone rich standing up for fairness, not privilege. Others twisted the narrative. Why couldn't she just let the old man sit there? It's just a seat. The truth was plain, but interpretation warped it like heat waves over asphalt. And that was the real twist. The fight was no longer about a seat. It was about perception. About who controlled the story. For Samantha, this was personal. If she stayed silent now, the headlines would crucify her. The billionaire girl who made a scene over a chair. The spoiled heiress who couldn't share. But if she spoke too forcefully, she risked feeding the narrative of arrogance. Every word would be replayed, analyzed, and judged. The stakes were higher than ever, not because of David, but because of the world watching. Justice wasn't just about proving her right to sit in 2A. Justice was about proving that fairness mattered, regardless of wealth, age, or power. As the crowd pressed him, David's mask began to slip. "You don't understand," he snapped at a passenger. "First class is wasted on people like her. Young, rich, spoiled. People like me deserve it more. We've earned it through years of struggle." There it was, the truth. It was never about culture, never about respect. It was envy, bitterness, the belief that someone else's privilege justified taking what wasn't his. And in that revelation, the fight sharpened. This wasn't about generational respect. It was about entitlement masquerading as morality. Passengers booed. Some shook their heads. The debate fractured further online. Samantha watched it unfold, her stomach tightening. Because she knew now, the seat dispute was simply a mirror for something larger. A truth about how power works in the world. How those who feel overlooked sometimes rewrite fairness to justify their own entitlement. The journalist's microphone returned. "Miss Hayes, people want to know, what lesson do you take from this?" Samantha could feel the weight of every camera, every eye, every future headline. This was the moment. If she answered poorly, she'd be ridiculed. If she answered wisely, she could transform the narrative. Her voice came steady, deliberate. "This isn't about wealth or class. This isn't even about me. It's about justice. Justice means the rules apply equally to everyone. If you buy a ticket, you sit in the seat assigned to you. If we abandon fairness in small things, we lose it in bigger things. Today it was a seat. Tomorrow, it could be something far more important." The gate hushed. Even critics paused, absorbing her words. For the first time, Samantha felt control, not over the situation, but over herself. She had drawn the line clearly. Fairness is not arrogance. It is the foundation of justice. But as the airline scrambled to rebook passengers, another twist surfaced. Staff whispered about the technical issue that canceled the flight. It wasn't routine. It was serious, a malfunction that, if left unchecked, could have caused disaster midair. The cancellation hadn't just exposed David's lie. It had potentially saved lives. And that realization sent a chill through Samantha. Had she boarded, had the plane taken off, all of this could have ended in tragedy. The argument, the humiliation, even justice itself, wiped away in the chaos of an emergency at 30,000 feet. She understood then, sometimes justice doesn't roar with triumph. Sometimes it whispers through circumstances. A cancelled flight, a truth revealed, a quiet protection hidden in disappointment. As Samantha processed this, her phone buzzed. A notification, a headline. Seat scandal goes global, billionaire girl versus black passenger sparks debate on justice and privilege. The world had chosen its story, and Samantha knew Act 2 of this fight wasn't in a terminal. It was online, in headlines, in living rooms around the globe, and she would have to decide, fight for her dignity publicly, or walk away and let the narrative spiral out of her control. At this point in the story, who do you trust more, Samantha, standing for fairness, or David, demanding respect? And do you think the cancellation of the flight was pure coincidence, or fate stepping in? Comment your thoughts. The airport terminal had never felt so small. Dozens of screens flickered with news reports. Passengers whispered in corners, pointing discreetly towards Samantha. Cameras hovered like vultures over carrion. But it wasn't just the crowd that pressed in on her. It was the story itself, twisting, reshaping, spiraling into something she barely recognized. Billionaire girl refuses seat to elderly passenger. Culture clash in first class. Respect versus privilege. Who was right? The truth, that David had lied, that he had taken what wasn't his, was being buried beneath waves of spin. For Samantha, this was no longer about a seat. It was about whether justice could survive in a world ruled by perception. David Cole, emboldened by the cameras, refused to retreat into anonymity. He stood tall, his voice carrying through the gate. "They're trying to paint me as a thief," he declared. "But I speak for every ordinary man who has been shoved aside by the rich. Tell me, why does she deserve more than I do? Because her father left her money? Because she wears designer shoes? Respect isn't bought, it's demanded." Some clapped, others booed. The terminal was divided, like a courtroom without walls. Samantha's blood simmered, not because of the insult, she had heard worse, but because she could feel the crowd bending under his words, twisting fairness into oppression, justice into arrogance. She stepped forward. Her voice was low, but sharp. "Respect is not stolen. You don't demand it by lying. You don't demand it by taking what belongs to someone else." David smirked. "Easy for you to say. You've never had to fight for a seat in your life." That cut deep, not because it was true, but because the world wanted to believe it. The airline staff pleaded for calm. Security edged closer, but the crowd wanted resolution, not retreat. "Prove her wrong." Someone shouted. "Show us the truth." Another called. It wasn't enough anymore that David's economy ticket had been exposed. The mob wanted spectacle. They wanted a winner and a loser. And Samantha realized the climax wasn't about who owned seat 2A. It was about whether she would stand her ground when the world demanded she bow. Her heart pounded. Her palms trembled. But her voice steadied. "Do you want proof?" she asked the crowd. "Fine. Let me show you something." She reached into her handbag and pulled out her boarding pass. The one detail no one could dispute. She held it high, the words printed in bold, "Seat 2A, first class. This is mine," she said. "Paid for, assigned, documented. Not because of my name, not because of wealth, but because the rules apply equally. You pay for a seat, you sit in it. Nothing more, nothing less." The crowd leaned in. The cameras zoomed. The truth was simple, undeniable. But David wasn't finished. "And what if I told you," he spat, "that rules are written to protect people like you? That the system is built to favor the rich while the rest of us fight for scraps? Isn't bending the rules one small act of justice for people like me?" The terminal buzzed with divided reactions. Some nodded. Others frowned. It was the most dangerous argument of all, not because it was right, but because it was seductive. Samantha knew she couldn't let that idea stand unchallenged. Her voice rose, cutting through the noise. "Justice isn't bending the rules when it suits you. Justice is when the same rules apply to everyone, rich, poor, young, old. If you want respect, earn it by standing tall, not by stealing what belongs to others. Because when you take from someone else and call it justice, you don't honor yourself. You dishonor justice itself." Silence rippled across the crowd. For the first time, David faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted, searching for an answer he didn't have. The cameras caught it. The moment the argument collapsed under the weight of truth. But Samantha wasn't finished. She turned, not just to David, but to every camera, every viewer beyond the walls of that airport. You want to know why I fly commercial today? To remind myself that fairness isn't a luxury. It's the foundation of how we live together. I don't care how much money you have, or don't have. The moment we decide some people can take what isn't theirs, we lose the very thing that protects us all. Justice. Her words echoed. The gate was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. And then, a clap. A single pair of hands. Followed by another, and another. Applause rippled across the crowd, small at first, then swelling. Not unanimous, but strong enough to turn the tide. David's face hardened. The applause wasn't for him. His argument had crumbled. His fight for respect was revealed as nothing more than bitterness, cloaked in noble words. For the first time, he looked small. Airport security finally intervened. Not roughly, but firmly. "Sir, it's time to come with us," one officer said. David protested weakly, but the power had shifted. His voice no longer carried weight. The cameras weren't centered on him anymore. They were centered on Samantha, the woman who had stood her ground without shouting, without breaking, without surrendering. As David was escorted away, Samantha exhaled. Her body trembled, but her spirit was steady. The climax had passed. The storm had broken. But Samantha knew the story wasn't over, because the videos would spread. The headlines would twist. Some would call her arrogant, others righteous. The fight wasn't just in the terminal anymore, it was global. And Samantha would have to decide, retreat into silence, or step forward as a voice for fairness, even if it meant being misunderstood. The terminal slowly returned to routine. Announcements called out new flight schedules. Passengers lined up to rebook. The roar of conflict gave way to the steady hum of travel. But Samantha stood still, her mind replaying every word, every look, every camera flash. The seat dispute had ended, but the echo of it lingered like thunder long after a storm. She sat near the window, watching planes taxi down the runway. Her reflection stared back at her, designer sunglasses pushed onto her head, a face both weary and resolute. She wasn't the same woman who had boarded that flight expecting anonymity. She was changed. From a distance, she caught sight of David Cole being led through a side corridor by airport security. His shoulders slumped, his defiance melted into resignation. For a fleeting moment, Samantha felt something unexpected, pity. Not because he had been humiliated, but because he had believed entitlement was the same as justice. Because bitterness had consumed him so deeply he couldn't distinguish fairness from revenge. And in that realization, Samantha found clarity. Justice wasn't about destroying your opponent. It was about holding on to dignity, even when others tried to strip it away. The irony wasn't lost on her. A cancelled flight had saved her from both humiliation and danger. If the plane had taken off, if the technical fault had gone unnoticed, lives could have been lost. What seemed like chaos had been protection in disguise. A whisper of justice, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. She thought back to her own words. If we abandon fairness in small things, we lose it in bigger things. And here it was, proven true. A small seat dispute had unveiled something larger, a lesson about how justice operates not with thunder, but with quiet precision. By evening, the story had reached millions. News programs dissected the confrontation. Commentators debated fairness versus respect. Social media raged with hashtags and think pieces. Some sided with David, painting him as a man speaking for the voiceless. Others applauded Samantha, calling her a symbol of dignity in the face of arrogance. But through it all, one truth emerged. The video had sparked a conversation the world needed to have. About entitlement. About fairness. About what justice really means. Her phone buzzed with calls, reporters, friends, even her father's advisors urging her to issue a formal statement. But Samantha ignored them all. Instead, she typed a short message to post online. Justice isn't about age, wealth, or power. It's about fairness. Today reminded me that respect isn't stolen, and dignity isn't surrendered. If we defend fairness in small moments, we protect it in the big ones. The post spread like wildfire, not because it was long, but because it was simple, clear, true. Samantha smiled faintly. She hadn't needed to shout. She hadn't needed to humiliate anyone. She had simply spoken the truth, and the truth had resonated. As night fell, Samantha checked into a quiet hotel room near the airport. She dropped her bags by the door and sat on the edge of the bed. The day had been long, exhausting, and unexpected. But as she closed her eyes, she felt peace. Not triumph, not bitterness, just peace. Because justice had been served, not in anger, but in clarity. Not in power, but in principle. And that, she realized, was the real lesson. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it cancels flights, exposes lies, and leaves dignity standing unbroken in the face of entitlement. Samantha drifted to sleep knowing this truth. The fight for fairness never ends. But as long as she carried it in her heart, she would never lose. If this story moved you, if Samantha's courage and the quiet power of justice touched you, please consider subscribing. It truly means the world to me, and it helps me keep bringing you more stories that matter. Together, we can keep these conversations alive.